get to the bag, ayy. Got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when the lane moving fast, ayy. Ayy, let them all cross. If they hate, then let them hate and make a bigger boss, ayy.
Hey guys, before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you know it is brought to you by Revenova, the official TMS provider for the Freight Coach. You guys, I've been a broker for a long time, and the tools that are at your disposal with Revenova help you eliminate bouncing between systems, which improves your accuracy when you are managing multiple tasks throughout your workday. Plus, it's built into the Salesforce cloud, so your CRM is fully integrated with your TMS, eliminating yet another silo. In today's day and age, you are definitely concerned about the safety of your data. With Revenova, it's fully protected. They have cutting-edge security that keeps your information safe so you can focus on what matters most, and that's growing your business. Speaking of growing your business, with Rate and Lane IQ, you get real-time pricing and route recommendations, helping you optimize costs and improve operational efficiencies, which ultimately helps you make smarter decisions. If you are like me and have recurring shipments from non-EDI customers, they have intuitive cloning features that let you easily replicate previous shipments, saving both shipper and carrier rates with just a few taps. If you are ready to learn more, visit www.revenova.com to request a demo. Just do me a favor and let them know that the Freight Coach sent you. This episode is brought to you by SPI Logistics, the premier freight agent logistics firm in North America. For over 40 years, SPI has been diligently building the most successful freight agent network to provide first-class relationships for our shippers, receivers, and carrier partners. We are more than another transportation network. We are a dedicated team of professionals united by one singular purpose, and that is to expedite our agents' success. All of our agents are set up for success on day one, as they are provided with a full suite of support staff that is ready to assist them with everything from after-hours emergencies to financial and administrative needs on a no-fee basis. This way, you can focus on continuing to grow your business. There is no financial risk to start, and you have the ability to earn up to 75% in commissions. If you are looking to take control of your financial future and build your business with the backing of one of the most successful logistics firms in North America, visit www.spi3pl.com to learn more. Do me a favor and let them know that the Freight Coach sent you. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Podcast, the top podcast in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines. But most importantly, you guys provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to save the rest of the intro because today's topic is about as real as it gets out here right now. There is a lot of stuff coming from all angles about what's going on with the English proficiency requirements out there that was recently talked about and implemented in the state of Arkansas. Oklahoma has one on the docket, and it's gaining, it's going on in DC and everything. And, there's a lot of opinions out there, you guys. And frankly, it is as somebody who is a, distinguished member of the media here, I like to kind of minimize opinions and bring actual facts on what all of this stuff actually means, because it's a topic that a lot of people are passionate about. And frankly, your opinion is kind of irrelevant in the eyes of the law. So speaking of the law, none of this is about what you're going to hear is to be taken as legal advice. This guy's a lawyer. He's not your lawyer. And if you need a lawyer, find your own. So with that being said, I got my man, Mr. Bryan Nelson, back on the show. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, the things that we have to talk about, it's amazing because you cover so many things and you do such a great job of breaking things down for everybody, that being able to talk about something as, now I know President Trump highlighted this in very, in the fashion in which he does, right, through executive order. And so it brings us back to the forefront. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
No, it needs to be said, right? Like at the end of the day, I get so disheartened out there when I'm scrolling through and I'm like, man, like, what does this have to do with anything, right? Like, your personal opinion and the law are two very different things. And if you're going to operate a business inside of this industry, which I actually do. I'm not just doing this for clicks and likes and everything else out there. Because if I wanted to take that stance, I would decimate everybody who does. Because I can go real fucking sideways on some stuff. But I want to bring information that people out there who are running a real company, who, whether you're in favor or opposed to this at all, you're going to have a decision to make here. And you need to be able to set your business up for success, because in the real world, when you literally have everything on the line, which every entrepreneur does, there are no retirement packages as an entrepreneur. It's either pass or fail. And this is a very real thing that will affect a lot of people in this industry.
Correct. And I think when we take a step back and look at, well, what's the timeline here? And I want to kind of take a few minutes to talk about the history of this. And let me start the way most movies do, right? They give you kind of a, hey, here's what's happening now, and then we're going to do a flashback. Early April 2025, so just last month, right? The chief counsel of the FMCSA, my former partner, was at a industry event and was specifically asked by a member of the audience, essentially, what are you doing with regards to enforcement of the English proficiency requirements found in 49 CFR 391.11 B2, subpart B2. And regardless of whether this was something that had been contemplated for a long time, within 3 weeks, there's an executive order on it. So anybody that thinks when you raise something to an elected official or to an appointed official in this instance that things don't get done, oh my gosh. So anybody that's able to talk to somebody, talk to them, because this administration just went from, hey, someone brought this up directly to the chief counsel of the FMCSA. Within 3 weeks, there's action on it. Yeah. And so when we look at the actual regulation, and I want to read this verbatim so we have a baseline of what we're dealing with, it's essentially drivers need to be able to, and so this is kind of the requirement, can read and speak the English language sufficiently to converse with the general public, understand highway traffic signs and signals in the English language, respond to official inquiries, and make entries on reports and records. Okay, so that's kind of our baseline. There's 4 essential things. Speak with the public, understand traffic signs, respond to official inquiries. Those are your kind of your roadside inspections, your way station matters. And then you have make entries on reports and records, so your bills of lading, any type of inspection report, any of your pre-trip, post-trip inspection, those types of things that you can understand that. Now, when we go back to when this law was enacted back in the 1930s, there are comments to the regulations, and like the papers that deal with why we're doing this and what's going on. It was intended by the ICC before it was the predecessors to the FMCSA and to the Federal Highway Administration, that this was supposed to be enforced through the employer. It was never intended to be enforced as a roadside inspection. Yeah. But as we know, nothing is ever really ends up as intended. And the the Federal Highway Administration went on and said, listen, speaking the English language is not a prerequisite for obtaining a commercial driver's license. And let me be clear, when we're talking about English proficiency, we're not talking about status as someone has the ability to work in this country or is even a citizen or non-citizen. That's not what this discussion is about. This discussion is about if you're legally licensed to drive, because if you're not legally licensed to drive, you're not legally licensed to work here, we're not having this debate, right? We all agree that you shouldn't be here and providing services as a motor carrier. We're just talking about those people that are authorized to work. Do they have proficiency in the English language? Now, jumping from the 1930s, and I know we're making kind of a big jump. In 1997, during the Clinton administration, the Federal Highway Administration came out and said, hey, listen, let's do a proposed rulemaking here. We want to try to make it more stringent or make it more definitive test to determine how we can determine whether a driver is proficient in the English language. And let me say this. There were 58 comments in total for this proposed rulemaking. Now, and like I told you before, right? This was before our boy Al Gore invented the internet, or at least it was the internet as we see it now, right? And so now if we were to propose any type of rulemaking on this, the comments would be in the hundreds, possibly thousands easily. And so the reason why they brought up this proposed rulemaking was in response to the ACLU brought up a comment or brought a charge, right, indicating that, hey, the English language requirement conflicts with the Civil Rights Act that deals with, hey, you can't discriminate against applicants or beneficiaries for an administration or federally funded program based on race, color, national origin. And this goes back to the comment I wanted to make. It's not based on national origin. It's based on English proficiency, whether you're from this country, you immigrated here legally, or even immigrated illegally. This is based on simply the fact that are you proficient in those 4 things with the English language? Mm-hmm. And so the EEOC jumped on board and was like, yeah, we agree that this could conflict with federal civil rights laws. And the ACLU, what I love about this is that they say the alleged regulation as written is overly broad and subject to arbitrary enforcement. Well, I think that's why we're here, right? Because I think we actually all agree this is subject to arbitrary enforcement. And so when you looked at the 58 comments that came in, the groups representing the trucking industry, the labor groups, the drivers, the insurance companies, and the association, essentially the people that are driving in the industry, mm-hmm. They're like, no, we're good. We don't need to do anything. But when states in the general public, the 9 states that commented and the 20 commenters that were out from the general public, they're like, no, we need to make this more strict. So essentially the people inside the industry are like, no, we're good. Let's leave it as is. And people with the outside view are like, let's be a little bit more aggressive. And so what they said was, listen, this sets forth qualifications. And this goes back to my comment about how it was originally intended. This regulation allows each motor carrier, as the employer, the flexibility to determine the extent the proficiency needed to enforce it. Meaning, hey, if I'm doing an ag hauling work versus I'm doing hazmat, I can determine how proficient they need to be. And that's why we have this arbitrary nature with, the argument, hey, this is arbitrarily enforced, because if we leave it up to the individual employers, the motor carriers, then yeah, some people will say, well, I don't need him or her to understand the English language as much as someone who's, possibly loading, unloading, moving something of, high risk to the general public. And they say, hey, listen, this is not in conflict with any of your previous executive orders regarding improving access to persons with limited proficiency. Mm-hmm. Then we get to 2005, under the George Bush administration, the CVSA comes out and says, hey, we're going to include this English proficiency as an out-of-service criteria. And then the FMCSA puts out a policy memorandum about 2 years later, and it says, hey, listen, and I want to read this because this is really important. If you are within the border commercial zones, so a Mexican domiciled carrier comes over, you won't be placed out of order for a violation. You will just be cited. But everybody else outside of those commercial zones, inspectors are told that they must conduct a portion of the roadside inspection in English, specifically the driver interview. Drivers must respond appropriately in English, demonstrate proficiency. Failure to respond appropriately to basic questions will result in an out-of-service violation. Inspectors are instructed to speak slowly, which I have a huge problem doing, but naturally, and they are not to rush through questions and may paraphrase in English the sample driver interview questions. So that brings us to 2007, 2008, more of the same. And then 2014, we start to get into, under the Obama administration, different kind of now transition. It says, hey, listen, that English proficiency doesn't apply to the hearing impaired. We need to make accommodations for that. And then in 2016, the CVSA, separate organization, votes and says, hey, we're no longer going to do this, count this as an out-of-service violation, because there is no data correlating crashes to English proficiency, right? This is around the time, right? Basic scores are still getting fought because, there's no correlation between crash data and the basic score. So we have a lot of this, hey, we're going in and looking at crash data versus certain types of things that are impacting safety. And then for the inspectors, for those officers that are there, they just need to communicate sufficiently to get through the inspection. Essentially, do you feel comfortable that they understood what you were saying in a way? Like if you say, hey, point to this, and they go, oh, yeah, over here. Is that enough? Okay. Mm-hmm. And then obviously we have our most recent executive orders. One is the designation of English as the official language. That's Executive Order 13166. And then we have April 28th, the Executive Order 14286. which essentially says, hey, FMCSA, you have 60 days. English language proficiency policy, testing and enforcement policy must start becoming a priority. You have 60 days to figure this out and get this moving. And by the way, the CVSA last week passed and said, hey, actually, let's go ahead and make this an out of service violation as well. So we were right back to where we were at the beginning, only the difference is now it's being used as a roadside inspection tool. And so that's kind of the full gamut of where we are and how we got here to what we're seeing today.
So how does a fleet, or how does somebody, like I want to, obviously there is going to be situations that arise potentially, right? I want to blanket that to protect myself by not saying that this will happen.
Yes.
But potentially somebody's going to get pulled over. They're going to get a roadside inspection, and there is going to be an officer who deems he doesn't think you can speak good enough English, even though you can, right? Because there's a lot of personal biases that I can see come into this. And I'm not here to argue whether what's right or what's wrong, other than how can a carrier protect themselves in that instance where in their eyes, they deem that driver qualifies based on the 4 parameters that were laid out prior in this episode. But maybe the DOT officer doesn't think that that's good enough.
Yeah, and I think, the way the problem that we're running into, I think your question is discretion, right? Yeah. If you're speeding, were you speeding or not? Now you may say, hey, your radar gun is not calibrated correctly, or hey, you don't know what you're talking about. You radared someone else. It wasn't me. But generally, you were wearing your seatbelt or not is not objective, right? You were speeding or weren't, not objective. The tire tread, not objective, right? Your lights weren't working, not objective. Or not, sorry. All those things are objective, not subjective. Yeah, let me correct all that. Backtrack. And so when we get to the subjectivity of this, right, your subjectivity is, well, if you're drowsy, right? If you look fatigued, blood alcohol from an intoxication standpoint is a little more objective than subjective. And then we get now to here. So we're going to run into instances, and I'll say this, different communities have different, I guess, saturation of non-English first language individuals and drivers. And so when we deal with commercial motor vehicles, not only are we dealing with, okay, what is the definition of a commercial motor vehicle? Generally, under the federal regulations, right, it has a weight requirement. And we're not talking about, exempt commodities versus non-exempt commodities, or interstate or intrastate, because almost every state, Florida, includes this under Florida Statute 316.302. 1B essentially says, hey, listen, we're going to adopt everything from 49 CFR 391, where this comes from. Same thing with Georgia, Section 40-1-8H of the Georgia Code. Does the same thing, brings down the reference to 49 CFR Part 391. And so anybody moving anything in any state has this. Mm-hmm. And I will say, when we're talking about the subjectivity of this, I'll give an example. In 2010, North Carolina had a policy memo that they sent out that said, hey, listen, we're not going to issue out of service orders because we can't do this uniformly. Mm-hmm. We can't address this. Now, there was a Title VI complaint with the United States Department of Justice at the time, and they're like, well, we're just, to play it safe, we're not going to put anybody out of service. And so when it comes to the subjectivity of it, the best way to protect against subjectivity is to find a way to manage and handle all of the items in English that you can expect to come across, right? Now, there are certain things, right? If they start talking about something non-related to your operation, you can't judge, but this might be something where we want to get some sort of English language proficiency training to our drivers, which obviously for those of you motor carriers that are squeezed for, funds, this is just another cost for you. But on the flip side, Arkansas just added a little bit more teeth to the requirement that says, hey, there's going to be a $500 fine for your first offense, and then a $1,000 fine for every occurrence after that. So paying a few $100s possibly to get some English language proficiency. Now, to the subjectivity part, we don't know what the FMCSA is going to do and what the individual state highway patrolmen are going to do when it comes to how do we test this, are they going to have like a test? Are they going to have a standardized test? And this was one of the things in the proposed rulemaking they came up with back in 1997 was, hey, should we have a specific test? Mm-hmm. And they eventually went against it. So the subjectivity is going to be there. If there is a concern that this individual does not understand the roadside inspection, does not understand the signs, or is able to communicate effectively with the officer, I will assume based on this executive order, instead of where the goal was to, hey, if they can make it through it in some form or fashion, we can move forward. I think it's going to be, the presumption is, let's focus on safety and not have that individual out on the roads. Now, the safety aspect of it, I don't know that there's any data out there. I have a number of clients who this will impact will have a negative impact to their business, and I have clients who are championing this move. Regardless, it's the rules in the regulations. It's not new. It's not catching anybody by surprise. It's just we don't know how it's going to be enforced.
Yeah. And I think because some of this, inside of the Arkansas, the new language in there, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's a piece that to me is like, I actually find it pathetic that we even have to have this in there, right? Because it says that it's, Class D felony charges for drivers operating without valid visas, work permits, or holding fraudulent CDLs. Like the fact that that's even in there to me in the sense of this, like if you're operating a business inside of this country, if you are working inside of this country and you are not a U.S. citizen, like the everything's very well published out there, right? And again, like you said earlier is a really good point. The rule breakers are going to break the rules no matter what, you guys. Like they don't give a shit about any of this stuff out there. But the fact that this even has to be said to me shows how diluted a lot of this stuff becomes when there's so many different advocacy groups that are out there that are trying to fight. And then they're trying to like, oh, there's a little gray area. Let's exploit it. And that's on either side of the aisle here. I feel like this is a very black and white thing here, Bryan. Are you legally operating a truck on the road or are you not? Are you legally, here to work or not? And that's it, right? Like there should be zero subjectivity to this stuff. And I feel like the fact that we have to put this out there now just shows how diluted all of this has become. And this is just one small piece of the puzzle out here and all of these laws that affect the transportation industry.
Yeah, let me take a step back and say, obviously that part of it's a separate section than the English proficiency, right? Having a invalid license or fraudulent license from a foreign entity, right? So all of that is separate and apart from the English proficiency, which I think is either subsection C or D within that new rule in Arkansas. And so when we're looking at kind of all the tools available to someone to verify the ability of that person to work in this country, that remains unchanged by this. What we don't know is changing, right, is if you get placed out of service, it's not like, oh, you're over your hours, you're out of service, do your restart and or your 10-hour, reset period, and you can start driving again. How do we go back? Does he go back to that officer and say, hey, no, I understand English now. Let me back in my cab. These out of service are going to be extremely detrimental to the specific transit that you're on. So if there's going to be, some sort of delay, if you're moving perishable goods, there's a lot of stuff that comes out of Florida, right, from the ports down here from South America that, whether it's produce, whether it's fruits and vegetables, whether it's, any type of tropical plants that come out, those things are perishable. They're going to, if they sit in a truck or in a trailer, they're going to deteriorate and you're going to have claims. And so, especially if it originates from somewhere down here in South Florida or any other jurisdiction that has a high number of non-Spanish or non-English speaking drivers, the claims potential is significant. And I will assume that your cargo insurance will not cover you for any type of delay. And you being placed out of service because of English proficiency and then not being able to get a driver there on time, that most certainly will hit a delay type argument. Now, there might be other factors that we might be able to fight to get coverage under your cargo coverage. But also, if you're a broker, this is extremely important from a service standpoint. A lot of these clients, right, they try to put in fines and penalties for late delivery, late arrival. And at what point, you get those arguments, right? You get those things, right? And you as a broker, you fight this, but you talk to your customers and your customers, What's the number? Oh, they broke down. Okay. Well, now all of a sudden we say, well, no, they actually got a CSA violation, or sorry, an FMCSA violation for English proficiency. They can't get somebody else there. Mm-hmm. Okay. So now we deal with the broker's contingent cargo claim. Well, does that apply? Do you have coverage for delay? And so then we also let's go a step further. Will the CVSA have, fleet weeks dealing with English proficiency, right? We have break week, right? We have hours of service week. Are we going to have English proficiency week? And now all of a sudden, everybody that doesn't feel that they have confidence in their English proficiency will just sit on the sidelines. And now we have just another week of tighter capacity. And then the one final thing that I will say about this is, because we don't know if there's going to be a standard test, we obviously don't think there will be, because then people can just cheat on that test. I know exactly what to say, how to say it to prove my English proficiency. But then we look at cases like the Werner case, right? And a case that you've talked about multiple times, where it essentially says we did everything right to an extent, but we didn't follow our own procedures. And had we followed them, we would not have been there, even though the other party came crashing across the median, right? Came out of control, speeding, came across the median. I came to a controlled stop afterwards. What happens if they say, well, that driver wasn't proficient in English, therefore that truck should have never been there, right? So you can see the implications of this, and the executive order doesn't change anything. It just brings to light and highlights this thing that says, hey, everybody, look at this. This is extremely important. And so from a cargo claim standpoint, from an auto liability standpoint, and especially from a broker standpoint, the ability to do this and comply with this is extremely important. And from the cargo claim standpoint, the other part, if that person's not proficient in English and they can't get somebody over there, that vehicle gets towed. Mm-hmm. And I know brokers love dealing with tow bills that aren't their responsibility. And depending on the state, right, some tow companies are like, well, I'm not going to release the cargo, even though I'm not allowed to have a lien on it. And so that's where we usually get involved and try to fight those and get local police and sheriffs involved, because they can't do that. But those are some of the things that we're going to run into with this.
Do you think, from perspective, Bryan, there's obviously there's a lot of panic that is going to be out here, with it, because, again, everything I truly feel like is like a case by case basis with a lot of this, right? I feel like there's a lot of subjectiveness that could come. I'm not saying it will, but I feel like there is kind of a lot of gray area out here, because I truly, from my perspective, operating a truck and speaking English are two very different things, right? Like the ability to operate a semi truck safely and speak English are two very separate things out there. So it's like, but I truly feel like in my heart of hearts, if you're going to be operating a fleet, or if you're going to be operating anything on the freeways, you should be able to understand road signs. You should be able to understand them in the country of origin that you're operating in. That's across the globe, right? Like I look at some other complementary industries that are also different at the same time. If you've ever flown across the world, you will understand that English is the primary language for every pilot that operates planes on a commercial basis across the globe. And, again, you got to ask yourself, why is that? And it is that set standard that's out there. There is no gray area. And I feel like this is something that we have to work towards getting to, is eliminating any and all gray areas that could affect this out here. I truly do, because I feel like every time there's one question, there's 14 other ones that can kind of arise from this, but there has to be a set standard, and there cannot be any deviations away from that.
Well, when it looks at this, when you look at this, I'm curious to see if the ACLU will bring another action regarding this matter.
Of course they will.
Because at this point, right, it seems pretty clear, and it doesn't seem unreasonable.
Yeah.
Right. If you are someone who's operating on our roadways, and I would assume that unless you're doing like local Miami moves, or perhaps local South Texas, or local Southern California moves, you're going to come across individuals that speak English and don't speak Spanish, right? And so you're going to have to converse with the general public part. That's going to be a little harder, because the officer is going to be asking very pointed questions, because they're not going to want to get off topic and then fall into some sort of, further gray area. Am I part of the public? Well, no, you're an officer, right? And you are acting as an officer. And that kind of brings me to my next point is we've seen states not comply with various immigration type or immigration adjacent type rulings or orders or directives. Will the state of California enforce this? Will they say, hey, listen, we're not going to enforce this, even though this is out there in the executive order? We're not going to put this in when we do our roadside inspections, we're not going to place this on there. And then we have, disparate enforcement. So we have a carrier that's getting hit with this because Texas goes and enforces this. Well, now all of a sudden their basic scores, right, or their safety rating, perhaps they jump the line now, right, for their on-site inspection. They sit here and say, well, I'm getting hit harder than someone in Southern California, but Southern California is not documenting this. And so now you have how reliable are the basic scores. Mm-hmm. And then also if you're a broker and you have, whether it's, any type of your carrier vetting software like Carrier Assure, right? You go out there and you say, hey, I'm going to base it based on, however many violations they have in these basic scores. And I set that parameter and it doesn't change anything. Well, are you okay with giving up people or giving up carriers because now that they have the English proficiency being thrown into those out of service violations, now their out of service percentage goes up? And so you have all of these kind of domino effect in terms of capacity. And maybe that's the ultimate goal, right? Getting capacity down, which to some people that's great, because I don't think we have the driver shortage that we have been screaming about, right, for the past 10, 15 years.
Not even close. There's no driver shortage at all under any circumstances. And if you want to argue that there is, go try and develop business. Go cold call shippers and ask if they need any help with any of their freight, because they're good. There's plenty of trucks on the road.
Let's bring up shippers.
Yeah.
I've had clients call me and say, hey, listen, my shipper will not accept this driver. We have shippers starting to enforce this even before the executive order.
Yeah.
They said, I'm not going to take this. I don't trust this. One, it starts from a theft standpoint, right? They're concerned that this person isn't giving a valid ID and they can't verify because they don't have anyone on their dock that speaks Spanish. And so you have shippers may jump in and start enforcing this. So a broker, again, sends a carrier, or even a carrier has direct relationships with the receiver, right, is contracted to go pick up these goods. The shipper says, I'm not giving it to you. I know you're supposed to speak English because I saw the executive order. I don't know much about transportation, but I sure as heck saw that executive order, and I'm not going to load this guy.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you're not going to get anything from a truck order not used standpoint. You're not going to get any detention or layover and getting a new driver out there. And then you're going to have service failures. So there is, an opportunity, especially I know brokers from a liability standpoint under, all the cases dealing with broker liability, we want to stay away from contracting and dealing directly with the driver to the extent we can, right? We want to deal with the motor carrier entity. Mm-hmm. Well, if we don't ever speak to the driver, how do we know if they're proficient in English, right? And so that kind of is your first test. If the broker is hiring a carrier and they're able to talk with the driver, converse with the driver easily, they don't need to get, because almost every broker I know have multiple Spanish-speaking dispatchers and brokers. And so I would say, it's not a requirement to get a CDL to have Spanish can still be your primary language. French can be if you're from Canada or, any other type of Eastern European language. So there are opportunities for you to have work and be here, but to understand the rules, to understand the documents that you're signing, right? Because then you get to a capacity issue. If somebody signs a document, if I'm playing attorney here, and you say, well, your driver signed this. Well, my driver didn't understand what they were signing. So how can they give informed consent that they accepted all these goods? Because how can they read the bill of lading, right? So you get into all these things. You understand why the driver or the English proficiency is a requirement.
Yeah. No, dude, I'm right there with you, right? Like there's a lot of good that can come from this, but there's also a lot of counter arguments that are already being made, that will be made about this.
Yep.
And it will be interesting to see how far this gets pushed out there. I think, like, at the end of the day, my opinion on this is I want the roads as safe as possible. All right. I want the people who are operating these semis to be operating as safe as humanly possible. And I truly feel like if you do not understand what direction you are going and you cannot read road signs out there, you are inherently increasing the risk for a accident to happen if you don't know where you are going. All right. It's very simple.
And let me say this. I've been to places in Florida where I'm like, I don't understand which lane I'm supposed to be in. And I understand the language, right? I have my GPS is screaming at me. Like last week, I was going to an event and I literally put me on the toll road long enough to go through the toll and then come back off. And I'm like, why the heck did I just do that? And they're like, oh, well, you just wanted to pay some. I could have just stayed on the side road. I would have been fine. But there are times where I have no idea. And I struggle to understand which lane am I in. And if I didn't understand the English language, then that would be that much more complicated. And as we know, people in cars never get stressed out, never get angry, right? Ever. It's usually the most calm, relaxing place that anyone can ever be in. And so, and especially when you're surrounded by, countless other friendly motorists, it's just such a wonderful place to be. But I say all that to say, insurance may play a role in this, right? So insurance companies start to get involved. Insurance companies start to say, hey, show us the proficiency, do some sort of attestation, right, regarding the proficiency of your drivers in the English language, right? And so then you have insurance companies that maybe are saying, hey, listen, I'm not going to insure you. Or if they find out that the driver, because they go to call the driver afterwards to get a statement and they can only speak Spanish, the insurance company says, well, you've breached the policy. I'm not going to provide coverage for you because this driver clearly, it's not like something to where we can say, well, no, he knew English last week. He just forgot it now. This would be something that if they don't know it when they go to review the case afterwards, that there would be that issue. So again, from the out of service standpoint and from an insurance standpoint, there may be opportunities for them to say, well, we're not going to provide coverage for you because of this. So there's a lot of things that it makes sense to get ahead of this. I don't know how ahead of it is after the executive order has already been issued, but to catch up and make sure that your drivers are compliant. And teaching someone a new language is never a bad thing, right? It makes your workforce, and I will say as Americans, we generally know less languages than the people over in Europe. Individuals down in South America, they generally know more languages than we do, but that doesn't change the fact because we're not over in those countries providing those services. We're here providing services here. And while despite the executive order earlier this year, America does not have a national language, but that doesn't change the fact that all of our road signs, most of our all of our documents are provided in the English language.
Yeah, I agree, Brian. There's a lot yet to be seen out there, but the people need to understand the facts are the facts. The executive order is the executive order, and you need to get your business in line with what is out there. You guys, again, your feelings can be one thing. The law is very different. And trust me, not saying Brian, but there are attorneys out there who are hoping you do not do anything about this, get caught, and they can sue the shit out of you for being in violation of that, right? Because that is kind of how things work out there, ladies and gentlemen. Again, we operate in the real world. All right. This isn't fantasy land. This isn't social media land where we just go for clicks and likes and everything else to boost engagement. On a micro scale, you guys. Brian just literally laid everything out there for you for what you guys can do to get the ball rolling. And again, he might not be your attorney, but if you feel like after hearing this, you need one, contact one, you guys. You have to protect your business out there because nobody else will. It's your responsibility. You own it.
Absolutely.
Brian, how does anybody reach out to you?
So you can reach me. My email is bnelson@taylorlawpl. That's TAYLORLAWPL.com. So bnelson@taylorlaw. And then my phone number here in my office is 813-212-1005. Shoot me an email, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Bryan Nelson. I know that's a pretty generic name, but you'll eventually see my beard somewhere on there, and you'll be able to find me.
If you guys can't find Bryan for whatever reason, hit your boy up. I will gladly put you guys in contact with Bryan over there. That is going to be it for today, ladies and gentlemen. As always, if you got value in what you heard, which I know you did, and you're not subscribed, subscribe to the show, you guys. And if you're feeling really ambitious after this one, which you definitely should be, rank the show as well on iTunes and Spotify, because if you saw value, that's how your network's going to see value as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys, and we'll be talking to you soon.